Assalamualaikum everyone. Okay, so today we're going to focus on analyzing and designing electronic records management system. Okay, are you ready? Okay. Designing electronic records management system. Okay, do remember, when we're talking about designing electronic records management system, it is different with designing other information application system, other business information system. Okay, why? Because electronic records management system, there are principles that you need to follow. Okay, so do remember that, because we want to develop the trusted ERMS. We want to develop the system not only can preserve the information as long as needed, but also to manage the evidence. Okay, it is not easy when we are talking about managing the evidence. Okay, the system should perform, should be able to have all those criteria. For example, cannot be edited, cannot be deleted, altered, and so forth. And then the system should have the retention period. We can't store all the information permanently. We must have the time duration, how long to retain each records. Okay, and then when we're talking about the electronic records management system, the system should be able to preserve the information as long as needed and so forth. Okay, and then must have the authoritative, and then how are we going to ensure that the system capture the content, context, and structure and so forth. So in order to have all those things, the first step, you need to develop the functional requirements for the management of electronic records in the organization. Okay. As you can see here, documented requirements is necessary to serve as the basis for designing systems that facilitate the record-keeping process and the benchmark for measuring the performance of existing systems. Okay. So in designing the electronic records management system, records manager has a key role to play in designing ERMS. Records manager should guide the technical designer in developing the ERMS, because the principles of ERMS different with other information application system. Okay, so to avoid the requirements being misinterpreted or record keeping being compromised, the documented functional requirement is necessary to be developed before designing the ERMS. And the second one, once we have developed the functional requirements for the management of electronic records in our organization, then we can design the ERMS. Okay, so these are the stages to analyze and design a records management system based on the previous studies. Okay. So the first step before we start to design the electronic records management system, we have to do all these 12 stages. Okay, so the first one is preliminary investigation, and second one is analysis of business activity, and then identification of record-keeping legislation and requirements, and then reviewing and analyzing each requirements, and then relating the analyzed legislation and requirements to the organizational situation, and then assessment of existing system, and then publish the draft requirements and requesting written comments from stakeholders, and then establishing the final record-keeping functional requirement. Once we have established the final record-keeping functional requirements, then we can start to give to the technical designer to design a record-keeping system. Then once the technical designer has designed the record-keeping system, then we can implement the record-keeping system. And finally, we must have the post-implementation review. So for today, we're going to focus on these two: preliminary investigation and analysis of business activity. Okay. So this is the first step, preliminary investigation. Okay, what is preliminary investigation? Okay, do remember preliminary investigation should be performed before project conceptualization and project start. Okay, this is the basic things that we have to do. The first phase we have to do. Okay, why do we need to do the preliminary investigation? Because we want to retrieve the important data and information that will later be used in project conceptualization. Okay, but do remember the preliminary investigation should not be a long or major task. Okay, let's see. I give you an example. So this is our current situation in our organization. Okay, so our current situation, our aim is to improve our electronic records management system in the organization. So we want to do the preliminary investigation. We want to do a quick and initial survey whether we want to implement new system or we want to redesign current system. Okay, this is very important. Okay. Do remember a period of 1 or 3 months is recommended, depending on the project and the business processes in focus. If the investigation longer than 3 months, it should not be classified as preliminary investigation. Okay, so the preliminary investigation is we have the current situation, we have the issues and problems need to be overcome, and then we do the preliminary investigation to decide. Okay, in this case, we want to decide because our current situation is we want to improve the ERMS. So we want to decide whether we want to implement new system or we want to redesign the current system. So we must have the quick and initial survey to collect the information. Okay, let's see the example. Basically, the preliminary investigation is all about context. Okay, it's all about the background. Okay, so it involves gaining an understanding of the organizational rules and operation. For example, we have to know the corporate culture, whether the organization have the tightly structured, the democratic or the laissez-faire. This is very important because those top management will make a decision and we want to know who are the authorized person to access the records later on. Okay, and then in terms of examining the stakeholders and their requirements, okay, because we want to cater the needs and wants of the stakeholders, the users, and so forth. Okay, and then examining the technical infrastructure in terms of network capacity, software use, and so forth. Okay, and secondly, this is also the example, an awareness of how record keeping is conducted. For example, how record keeping fits within the organization, record keeping strength and weaknesses, barriers to improve record keeping. Okay, so in sum, when we're talking about preliminary investigation, it is all about context. Okay, where we collect the information of what we want to plan. Okay, and then we obtain an understanding of the factors that influence our plan and then establish the awareness. Okay, so that is the aim of the preliminary investigation. Okay, so these are the examples of our preliminary investigation aim. So basically, in terms of records management system, why we need to do the preliminary investigation? Because we want to make a decision whether to buy or build the system. Okay, and then identify the needs for a system. Okay, because why? Everything performed in future depends on system identification phase. And then why? Because we want to identify all possible ways to buy or build a system. Okay, this is very important to choose the best solution that fulfills the requirements. And then we want to do a feasibility study to identify whether the system is affordable and acceptable for the organization in terms of financial, in terms of time limitation, or other issues. Okay, for example, in terms of qualified staff, okay, in terms whether we want to fully utilize the internal staff, or we want to recruit the consultant, or we want to have the combination of internal staff and consultant. Okay, so these are the things we want to decide. Then we have to do the preliminary investigation. So as a conclusion, a preliminary investigation is to collect information from documentary sources, interviews, or observation, then identify and document the role and purpose of the organizations, its structures, its legal, regulatory, business and political environment, critical factors and critical weakness associated with record keeping. Okay, associated with the issues that we want to improve. Okay? Hopefully you can understand. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Okay, now we will focus on step 2. Step 2 is analysis of business activities. Okay, for this one, we have to gain a thorough understanding of the business activities and process that are carried out. Okay. The analysis is the process of developing an analytical framework of business activities and process of the organization. Okay, this is essential to map out the relationship between an organization's mission. For example, we already know that we have to investigate the organization vision, mission, goals and objectives, and then we have to know the strategic planning of the organization, and then we have to see whether this organization have the strategic planning for the records management or not. Okay, so this is very important. They have strategic planning for records management. Do they have the disaster preparedness for records management? And then in terms of administrative structure, okay, we have to investigate, okay, whether the organization have the qualified staff or not. Okay, we have to make sure that there are qualified staff to manage the electronic records management system. And then in terms of functions and process of the organization, we have to do the analysis of business functions and process. Why? Because we want to identify the vital records. And then we want to know the types of records available in the organization. Okay, this is also very important. Why we want to know the types of records? Because later on, we want to know how long to retain the records available in the organization. Do they have the retention schedule? Okay, and then do they have the coding system? Do they have the security policy and so forth? Okay, so these are the things that we have to analyze. Okay. Then, when we're talking about analysis of business activity, is to gain a thorough understanding. For example, analysis of the organization's business function and activities leading to the development of business classification scheme. Okay, so this is one of the examples why we need to do the business analysis and so forth. Okay. So in other words, this step help to gain a greater understanding of our organization or department or section, both at a micro level and a macro level, and the context in which records are being created. And then we can identify the problems and issues in depth. And then we can establish a business framework for record keeping tools, such as retention schedule, the retention and disposal schedule, which can also be used to settle metadata fields. and then establish your business framework to map record-keeping requirements to which all assist with the production of retention schedule, metadata strategies, the identification of vital records, gap analysis, and system design or redesign. Okay, so this is an example. When we're talking about analyzing and investigating the business system analysis, we can collect the information from the documentary sources, from the interview, from the observation, and then the analysis would be identifying and analyze the contextual information and then determine how, when, and where these are performed. Okay. Okay, look at the scenario, the case study, Malaysian Court of Appeal. Okay, so we want to do the business system analysis to solve our problem just now, improving the electronic records management system. Okay, so when we have decided we want to design the ERMS, so what we have to do is we have to investigate in depth. Okay, so in terms of contextual information, in terms of background, so we can investigate in terms of providential context and procedural context. What is providential context? Providential context is normally regarded as the creating body, its mandate, structure, and functions. Okay, include organizational chart, annual reports, official website, the classification schemes, and so forth. Okay, and then second one is procedural context, is rigorously concerned about the legal and organizational system indicated by law, regulation, workflow rules, codes of administrative procedures, classification scheme, and so forth. In other words, the procedural context of the organization governs the legal and business process of the organization. Okay, so in conclusion, when we're talking about contextual information, means that we focus on the providential context, the mandate, the vision, mission, and the strategic planning, and so forth, the administrative structure, and so forth. And then we focus on the procedural context in terms of what are the procedures available in that organization in terms of records management. Do they have retention schedule? Do they have the security policy? Okay, do they have the classification system, coding system, and so forth? So these are the things we need to investigate. And then we focus on the record keeping practice. Okay, record keeping practice in terms of record keeping, we have to investigate the record keeping practice in terms of the paper-based and also the electronic records, because sometimes we need to do the hybrid records management where the records available in two formats, paper-based, and also we digitize, convert into the electronic records. Okay, so we have to preserve the evidence in terms of reliability, integrity, authoritative, authentic, and so forth. Okay, and then in terms of types of records, it's also very important for us to identify the record series, for us to identify the vital records, and for us to know how long to retain the records. And then in terms of staff competency, it's also very important. Without competent staff, the electronic records management practice will fail. Okay, and then we have to do the investigation in terms of issues and challenges, and also what are the area of improvement. Okay, so if we are able to collect all those information, and it's easier for us to do the next steps, and it's easier for us to design the trusted electronic records management system. Okay, that's all for today. See you next class. Assalamualaikum and bye-bye.